to have you with us today. It's been really fun. We've been walking around a bit. We have not walked over the Williamsburg Bridge today, but I'm sure you've walked over that yourself. We walked over the Manhattan Bridge and the Brooklyn Bridge, and we're really excited to talk with you. The reason we wanted to have you on, well, there's a couple of reasons. You're our friend. You're fun to talk to. You're easy to talk to. You're smart. And this is our Bridge Week, and you're an architect. And even though you're not an architect of bridges, you know a lot about structures and making structures. So I guess, can we talk a little bit about how you got into doing architecture and like what you're doing with that these days?
Yeah, sure. I guess the journey with architecture began in high school because my high school offered like some sort of drafting class. And so that was the first time I ever, I guess, did design an orthographic projection, which for me, there's obviously that huge difference between that and like painting and doing something that's more free form. After high school, I went to art school, which was connected to the architecture school at the school I went to. And one day I wandered up to the third floor where the architecture school was and saw that everyone was doing way more interesting stuff than in the art school, to be frank. And I felt like the money I was spending on school would be better served actually doing things. So I ended up starting out school there. And then when I graduated, I moved to New York. The economy was crap for, especially like in the architecture business in 2009. But I got in my car and drove to like 5 different cities and set up like informational interviews and eventually got a job offer through that.
Oh, wow.
At this firm called KPF, which does these like super towers and airports and like crazy huge structures, which is what I sort of started doing when I first, I guess, in like my first like real non-intern job.
What would you do for those, like, were you doing designs or was it like assisting architects, or like what was like the job description in some of those first jobs with the massive structures?
Yeah, my job title was designer, or I think they called it designer 1.
Okay.
Which I think is just an entry-level designer position. And the first job that they threw me on was a huge airport in Nanning, China,
Wow.
which like the concept design was already done, which basically looks like a giant like crustacean like crab sprawled out.
Okay.
But like 1,000 times the size of that. And I like had to basically draw out like and figure out all the details for that whole project with one other person. So I was usually in the office from like 8 a.m. to like 10 p.m. because at night I'd be on these like conference calls with like 20 people with like the engineering and architecture practice on the ground
Wow.
in China, coordinating this like crazy airport structure. I had no idea what I was doing, and like I had to like literally model the building in this program, and it was kind of like wonky, the roof. And if you actually like, someone did this like crazy video on YouTube, like a flyover of the building with like this epic music, and like the like roof is a little bit like off. And I don't know if it's because of like, anyways, it was like kind of, I think the office like wasn't gonna make any money on the project, so they just kind of like put me on it and were like, figure this out. And I think me and my partner on that project did the best we could.
Yeah. When I'm sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just gonna say that's kind of an incredible thing to just be thrown into as one of your first jobs, to take on this massive thing. Do you remember like your feelings about that? Like, were you intimidated, or did you feel, it sounds like if you had like the like gung-ho ability to like drive around to different cities and take these interviews, and like you really like wanted it, right? Like, so do you feel like, were you energized by that pressure, or was it scary, or was it like a little bit of both?
Oh, I mean, I was
Or-
totally energized by by that, and also just like being in New York. Like, you know, I grew up in the suburbs in Michigan, and like I went to college in Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan. So it's like coming to New York City, even out of all the cities that I had like gone to on my like interview road trip, it was like certainly the one with like the most energy, and also the one that a lot of other architects I knew landed at. So I don't know, all of us were like kind of thrown into similar situations, and yeah, so it was kind of like a thrill, without much kind of contemplation for like what I was really working on in any real sense. You know what I mean? Because it was like, it's super bizarre to be working on these like giant structures that are going to, like, I've never been to that airport, you know?
Right.
That are being built on the other side of the world, and you're just like designing it in this like little like box. you know?
Right.
Yeah.
It's really bizarre. But yeah, that was the first project there.
And now, I mean, it seems like you've gone from, I didn't know that that was where you started in architecture, and now you're doing projects that you are more closely related to and that like you do go to. So how, I don't know if I, like, I'd love to hear the whole story of like how you got there, but maybe, do you want to say like what you're doing now? And then we can talk about this. I don't know if there's similarities or differences, or like what the process was from that massive like structure that you'll never go to, or that you haven't been to across the world, to like working more closely.
Yeah, I think, frankly, the big shift was like moving from working at a corporate architecture firm to starting my own practice. And so I think obviously with that, you're able to bring all of your own values into what you do. And after working on these super large scale projects in New York and around the world, I kind of decided that that wasn't the way to design for people, because often those projects were for clients that I just frankly couldn't align with their values. For example, back elevators designed into buildings to bring up prostitutes and so forth like that. Like,
oh, wow.
Those are projects that I actually worked on. And I think that's super common, to be honest, in these like huge developments, because you've got people with money and power who are just like, like doing whatever they want with that. So yeah, I think the big shift is really starting my practice with my friend Peter Yee, who I actually met in undergrad at the University of Michigan in our first architecture studio together. And really kind of with starting the practice, like making the decision that we really want to work with small businesses and local communities and nonprofits, because we feel like that through building relationships with people, that's more important to happen at the like as sort of the core of like design than anything else. It allows you to figure out, I think it's like it forces you to be more creative too, because you're kind of like, you don't have like infinite funds or money to kind of just like throw at this crazy huge building, but you really kind of have to figure out and be creative on how to like make things happen with and also you get to like, these people are your friends, they're like and like you get to kind of work locally with people, you get to work directly with the people building the projects, so it's like a really different process, and I think that's super important in the field, and I hope that more people start doing that, to be honest.
Yeah.
Do you feel like like when you're working with a smaller scale project and it's something that you have like more connection to, do you feel like also the person that is hiring you has more connection to it? Is that, I might just be making that up, but it seems like that would be the case. Do you feel like your clients, are they like more involved in sort of the smaller details, or is there like an excitement level that they have?
Yeah, I think they're more involved in like a personal sense, because often the project that we would be working on for them is something that they'll be using like on a daily basis, like with their own sort of work or something like that. And so I think they're more invested in it as well for that reason, but also because like architecture is really expensive, and like for these sort of like nonprofits and small businesses, it's like a big investment. And so, you know, they're putting a lot of kind of like their time and money into it in a way that, like, you know, if you're doing a project for like Jack Ma of Alibaba to do some like big like super tower, sorry that but it's different because, like, you know, I think that for someone to do like a legacy project is different than like to do to expand like their gardening space at their like urban farm, you know. And I think that the owners are more invested in it too, because they're usually tied to a community that they really care about, that the project will serve. So that's part of it.
One of the things that has always somewhere between intimidated me or always been a part of my thought process when it comes to the idea of constructing buildings or just objects is the level of precision that's required. At your place in the process, how do you already have to be that level, bring that level of precision to the thought, or does that get hammered out further along the line?
Yeah, like, so like you definitely, the way that like typically like the design of an architecture project works is you sort of start at like a concept level, so perhaps it lives more as an image or like a massing or something, and then as the project develops you start to figure out all of these little details, and the final goal from like the architect side, and I think it's one of the most important and undervalued parts of what architects do, is actually like the construction documents, because ultimately that is going to communicate like how the project will be built. But with that said, like, architects are in no way experts about construction in reality, and like contractors and the people who actually build things know way more about that. And so there's sort of this like process that happens through construction where through like kind of communicating with like the people who actually build the buildings, like changes happen, and like and so that's like a whole learning process. And honestly, like, every project is super different, because every project usually like just is a different site. So like, you know, the ground is different or the materials are different and so forth. So and I also want to mention that like the construction documents is not just like the work of the architect, but often with more complex projects, obviously there's like the engineers and the other kind of team members who really kind of, so the architect's role is really kind of to take all of that information coming from the client, and then also come up with the design, but then kind of coordinate all this different stuff into like a set of instructions, and then to continue that communication with the contractor as the project gets built.
So there's a lot of collaboration then. You like maybe start the conceptual design, but then once you start to get input from people that know more about the structural process, there's like collaboration. Like, does it kind of like cycle back and forth? Like, you might make something and then the engineer might say like, that's gonna fall down, you have to do this, and you're like, well, that's ugly, so like we're gonna fix it. Like, is it that kind of?
Yeah, totally. That happens all the time.
Yeah,
that's happening as we speak with one of our projects.
So. Oh, really?
Yeah.
You mentioned you were doing construction documents right now. Is that what that process entails?
Yeah, it's like, honestly, that the last sort of phase, I guess, is really figuring out how to get it built. And it's funny that like there's all these other kind of like phases that lead up to that, that are like all these other decisions that you have to make to finally kind of set the project in place and actually. But yeah, it's great. Like, I love working with other I guess like usually call them consultants, but they really are a part of your team, and it's like you learn so much from them, and that's the most fun part about architecture for me, is like being able to work with all these different people and to actually see something get built. It's pretty cool.
So, taking a bridge as an example, but also maybe like a medium to large size building, and maybe this all goes all the way down to small size projects as well. I really don't know, but if we were to say like what the top level team looks like on any given project. So like, for instance, just to use video games as an example, like there'd be a tech director, design director, an art director, a director, head of production or something like that. And as far as I can gather from researching the bridges, there's at least an architect and an engineer. And then I guess the client would be the city / the head of the government, Like what, are there other roles in addition to engineer or I guess architect, contractor? Like what kind of would be the high level roles?
Yeah, I guess I'll take like Hudson Yards as an example, because I didn't work on that team at KPF, but I kind of like saw the team from the outside, and I think it's a complex project that we all know about. KPF, the building that they did at Hudson Yards, it looks like this like ice berg that washed up from like some other foreign planet hit Manhattan. Super complex project, probably 20-person team for like 12 years.
Wow.
And part of the reason is because like all of the engineering that went in just to building the base over the rail yards that was there to build then all these towers on top takes an immense amount of engineering and coordination. I don't know as much about those like crazy civil engineering projects and like that hierarchy, I guess, but within like the office in that one building, there's like the partner that kind of is like the partner that makes like all the big design decisions and kind of like walks into the room every maybe week and just is kind of like overseeing that everything is going well. Might like, that's so like cliche, but might literally look at like a drawing on the wall and just like draw a line over it to show like the new angle of like the glacier. It's ridiculous.
Right.
And that's like maybe the design partner. There's then like the partner that probably at the office is more behind the scenes and is kind of dealing with the client related to funding, related to I don't know, just like other more like project management and contract related stuff. And then the actual project team of like 20 people is probably half designers working on every aspect of that building, and usually it's broken up into different parts. So one person might work on the facade, one person might work on like the interior layouts and making sure that makes sense, and like the core, like the coordination of like the core systems and all of like there's a lot of stuff that goes into the building core, so like coordinating all of that. But then there's like the project manager who I guess is basically just keeping everything on schedule and making sure decisions are being made. And yeah, I guess like the bigger the project, like the more roles are created and the more duplication of the type of role. But then in a small project, like if you're building like a garage, but like a cool garage where you needed like where you wanted to hire an architect, like maybe that would happen at like my office or something. It's
Right.
like that would be Peter and I taking on like every role of that. So project management, design, all the contract stuff, making sure that like you're getting it permitted, then all like just the general kind of running the business stuff too. So
Yeah.
That must take a lot of, I guess when you're in a bigger team and you're working on a bigger project, the purpose of having everyone have a different role is so that, like, even as cliche as that is, that the designer comes in and is like, this is the angle of the glacier. It is like, that's his only thing that he has to think about. Or I'm assuming it's
Right.
a he. I'm
Yeah.
saying but that's the only thing that person has to think about is like, okay, all of you other people are like focusing on these other things and the glacier is slanting. This is our angle. But if you're doing all those things at once, that must take the ability to like focus on each thing, like only use a chunk of your brain at a time while all the other gears are still spinning.
Yeah.
That sounds like a lot, but I guess it also allows you to, like you said, like learn different aspects of it and sort of like work from a more holistic standpoint. Maybe like you actually understand the whole thing and can communicate the whole process to whoever you're speaking to, or understand like, I just think that's really cool that as the designer you might also understand like the very small mechanic of how something was created.
Yeah, totally. I think you know, reflecting on the question earlier about, I guess, the changes in what I've been doing in architecture, I think ultimately it ties back to that being in an office on a 20-person team in Hudson Yards, you're actually much more isolated. Like, there's no need for you, if you're working on like a certain aspect of the building, to talk to anyone else about any of the other parts of the buildings necessarily. So
right.
And there's like this kind of detachment then from like all the other people involved, not even in the architecture firm, who are working on it, not to mention the people that will like build it, and the power dynamics of like, you know, the people that like developed it. Like all of that's kind of hidden from you, and and it's intentional for sure. But yeah, I don't think that, and you're right about the partner, like the partners at KPF are mostly white men. So it's like, there's all these things that were going on, and seeing how Hudson Yards was built and all these other projects that definitely, I feel like influenced me in terms of like where I am today. And I would never go back to like a corporate office after seeing kind of like the practice and negligence, and like, I mean, I don't think it's like intentional negligence, but like, it's definitely like people have had to like turn off a part of their brain to not think about the realities of like of these things and how they get built. So it's just not something I could do anymore, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.